We are back doing more Resolute TV. So this is episode 1, season 3. Note, the discussion that took place between Dean and Ross Cameron happened prior to President Biden's now presidency, aka Kamala Harris's presidency. But tell me what you guys think with this first portion. And bada bing.
Rightio, ladies, gentlemen, boys and girls, and everything in between, as we do each week. We're delighted to host the original outsider, or certainly one of the original outsiders of Australia's famed Sky News program, The Outsiders. Among other things, a former Liberal Party politician. I don't think they like me very much anymore, those guys, but I don't think they like this gentleman much either. We have the wonderful Mr. Ross Cameron. Thank you for joining us.
It's good to be here.
Mate, you've had a wild and wonderful ride in the public eye over the last few years. I believe you were elected to Parliament, was it 96?
That's right. I'm pretty sure it was March 1996. The original Howard wave.
The original Howard wave. I'll get straight onto it then. How do you feel about the gun laws?
Look, I think there is a tendency to wish to ascribe to the weapon the intention which comes from the user of the weapon. I think very often efforts by government, even when well-intentioned, tend to backfire, and gun laws is one of them. Well, I know here, for example, in New South Wales, we had a situation where every gun club was required to keep a register of everyone who had bought ammunition, including their sort of name, address, phone number. So then the bike gangs would just break into the gun stores and steal the register. From there, they knew where every piece of spare ammo and weapon was in the whole city. A classic example of governments overreaching. And I think building a private culture of non-violence is preferable to trying to legislate it.
I'd have to say I agree with you 100% there. Usually governments think they mean well, and I think a lot of the bureaucrats and politicians do mean well. You could correct me. You've had a lot more to do with them than I have. I think generally speaking they mean well, but it's usually fairly well misplaced in results on the other end.
Yeah, I think there is if you say, well, what are the characteristics of the, quote, progressive mind? The progressive mind tends to exaggerate the defects of the citizen and magnify the virtues of the state. And what you get is an almost childlike belief that if you can pass a piece of legislation and describe it in a particular way, you will achieve the policy objectives of the legislation. But almost invariably we find the limits of force, the limits of the monopoly over compulsion which the state possesses, they first reveal themselves in a lack of competence. And so we just find time after time after time the most basic failures of competence mean that even the most well-meaning legislation is a failure in practice.
Yeah, it's a bit of a shame. I mean, the theory often works, but the reality is usually very different. And since we're, and I know you're a big Donald Trump fan, and I figure we might as well start off with the big issues. What are your thoughts on the election? How's it going to land?
Well, I see that that POTUS has just held a rally in Georgia in the last sort of 12 hours, in which he shows no inclination to resolve the issue. If your question is how is it going to land, I would say that I suspect I suspect betting markets are still giving Donald Trump, I mean, I haven't checked in the last 48 hours, but last time I looked, they were saying that one chance in 18 of being sworn in as the president in January, but that's still 1 in 18. It's not nothing. Rudy Giuliani is saying that they don't actually require the judgments of courts, most of which seem to have been politicised, and that they will go straight to the legislatures of the half a dozen or so disputed states, most of whom under their constitutions give the legislature the final right to determine what their delegates to the Electoral College will say and how they will vote. So, look, my gut instinct is that what we are witnessing is an empire which is in rapid decline and whose decision-making agencies have lost any real capacity for objectivity. They have been intensely politicised. They are no longer capable of delivering a just system. And so in the United States, you now have a 2-tiered justice system, where there is one tier for our friends and mates and privileged, entrenched insiders. So, for example, you see it in General David Petraeus, was thought to be a future potential Republican candidate for president. He can get sacked in disgrace for one kind of transfer of classified information from his classified account to his biographer, and he's sacked and his career is destroyed, in effect, for one relatively minor breach, which had seemingly no consequence for American national security. Yet Hillary Clinton can destroy 33,000 emails and take a hammer to what about 13 Blackberries and mobile phones. She can have the entire contents of her classified email account transferred to the boyfriend / husband of her personal assistant, and she will suffer absolutely no consequence whatsoever. So you've got this now sort of 2-tiered justice system, and I expect that system to do everything it can to ensure that Donald Trump is not sworn in for a second term.
Yeah. The Hillary stuff, that was amazing. When I read it, I sort of my poor little simple brain went, really? How can you get away with that? If I did that, I'd be in jail. No hesitation. I'd be done. And I suspect even somebody who, you've got sort of, I suppose, a family history in the political sphere of Australia, I guess. And, I'm sure you're not that juiced in that you could get away with that. Like, really? How do they do it? How far up the tree do you have to be to get away with destroying that many emails and Blackberries and all the rest of it?
Yeah, it's look, we ought not to be so naive as to think there is any system which is free of influence in favour of incumbents and vested interests and favoured parties. I mean, we've just had a judge of the federal court in Australia describe the CFMEU, Construction, Forestry, Mining and Energy Union, as I think he said, recalcitrant and recidivist, something like that, in terms of its record of law breaking. And what you see in the CFMEU is an organisation which has just achieved sufficient levels of power to, for example, hold hostage the workplaces of thousands of large building and industrial sites. And because it possesses that power, which it achieves by means of force, it's a kind of form of extortion. It is saying to the boss, unless you give us these log of claims, we'll shut down your business. And we will stand over the entry to the workplace with a large group of heavily muscled and tattooed blokes who will make it a very, very unsafe and unpleasant experience for an Australian.
I'm sorry, but you're not assuming those people's gender that are standing outside those rooms? Surely not.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this comes, of course, to the the next layer of what we might call the entrenched orthodox opinion. I would say the progressive left's its dominant motive is control. It is to exercise control over other people's lives. In order to assume control, it must constantly be manufacturing kind of crises which demand an urgent expansion in the regulatory powers of the state to intervene in people's lives. But part of it is trying to, I sort of feel if you send a child to an Australian public school today, it's virtually an act of negligence by a parent. Because what we've seen in New South Wales is the Department of Education, which is an absolutely militant gender doubt machine. And if you said, does the New South Wales Teachers Federation care more about whether a child can do long division or about whether a child should show adequate levels of doubt about their own gender identity, I just think, the actual education attainment of our kids is virtually the last thing on the list of the dominant factions that run education in this country. And it shouldn't surprise us that we have seen since 2000, when Australia was at the very top of the league tables globally in its educational attainment for reading, writing, arithmetic, problem solving, we are now in a catastrophic slide. We look like a mountain ibis which has lost its grip on the side of a Himalayan slope and is just tumbling, somersaulting down, bouncing from one rock to the next in our academic rankings. We've completely lost control of the educational project.
We are, from what last time I read or checked, our kids are about 4 years behind those children in Singapore. So,
yeah, well, it's. The PISA study of 2019 had us, I don't think it was quite that high. I think it was 30 months, according to one study. But what it means, that was of a 15-year-old. By the time they get to the end of high school, they probably are approaching, your number. But at the age of 15, they are already 2.5 years behind.
Considering how much we spend on it, or the taxpayer spends on it, that's an exorbitant failure, really. That's off the chart failure.
Yeah, well, the point, you make a good point, because the response of governments under pressure from teacher unions to what is obviously a kind of crisis has been universal, same in every state and territory, same at the federal level. The response to the problem has been we have to spend more taxpayer money. And so you wind up with the greatest, if you want to talk about what have been the complete counterproductive waste of time, one of them was appointing David Gonski to do an inquiry into education, the entire product of which was to come back recommending a different algorithm in order to fund public and private schools according to socioeconomic status, levels of disability, blah, blah, blah. So you get this intense determination to sort of twiddle the funding knobs, but you get no interest whatsoever in how you provide a motive for a young Australian to wish to achieve a high level of education.
So on that basis, I guess, if you were there's obviously people who send their kids to private schools and they can afford to do that. For the parents who can't afford to send their children to private schools, who would like a better education than what's currently being provided, would that almost make you an advocate for homeschooling if you've got the resources at home or the know-how or the intellect or the ability to homeschool? Would that be something that you would think is maybe a better option for the average family in 2020?
Yes.
Nice and simple, yeah.
Look, Dean, if we look through history at the finest minds in, say, Western civilization, the overwhelming majority of them were homeschooled. Yes. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor of Rome, from 161 to 180 AD, who produced at the end of his life what we call the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. The opening chapter of that work, called Debts and Thanks, he says, I want to thank my father that I was not sent to the public schools, but that I was educated at home and that I had good tutors and that I learnt on such things a man should spend liberally. So in much the rest of the work of the Meditations, Marcus talks about the importance of prudence in managing revenues and not spending on unnecessary things. But he says in relation to acquiring good tutors, this is something on which someone should spend liberally. And look, I just say I should sort of caution your setup of the question in the distinction between public and private schools. I find that the private schools are that much more protected from these sort of viruses of the progressive mind, which are determined to teach a set of attitudes rather than a set of, rather than to build confidence in the exercise of reason, whether in mathematics, science, literature, or elsewhere. The current curriculum has virtually no content. What it is designed to do is to ensure that a child coming out at the end of 12 years of education can rehearse a kind of liturgy which has got a series of slogans in it, which might include climate change, Indigenous disadvantage, anti-discrimination, gender fluidity, and some sort of idea of sustainability. All science should be reduced to a campaign against plastic bottles. And we wind up producing a bunch of kids who finish high school knowing virtually nothing, except this ability, this sort of childlike, wide-eyed ability to mouth a series of platitudes which they misunderstand to be an education.
It's a very scary. I've got a 7-year-old who explained to me the other day that he doesn't like Donald Trump because his teacher told him not to like Donald Trump. Now, I set him straight pretty quick and explained to him that now I'm fairly out and proud as a libertarian, so I'd rather see Joe Jorgensen or nobody at all, to be fair. But if we've got to have somebody and we've got the two choices that we've got, I'm a Trump guy over the rest of the machine all day long. But it did sort of, and that was what sort of posed me to get in. I really wanted to touch on the education stuff with you, because when your 7-year-old, now he doesn't live with me full time, so when you hear these things and you think, what are these kids being taught at school? There is a portion of me that thinks, I could run a better education system by saying, righto, he comes in with me, you're coming out of the school, right, but you want to learn about ancient Rome? Ross Cameron, I'd like you to help me set up some lectures on ancient Rome for my 7-year-old. Let's organise that. John Humphrey is a friend of mine who's an economist, right? I'd like you to teach this. I'm sure there's a better way of doing it than what we're currently doing. I had a lady who, Kerry McDonald from the Cato Institute, first series came on and we discussed homeschooling. She homeschools all of her children now. There's certainly a lot to like about it if you're in that situation where you've probably got some connections or an understanding of the types of things you'd like to teach your children.
Yeah, I think that is the biggest impediment, and frankly, it is for me. I feel secretly that I probably should homeschool my children for the balance of their education. And the trick is, do you rate yourself as a teacher to have the patience and the resolve and the levels of organisation? Now, I think you are touching on something quite interesting, which is that we are learning more innovative ways to communicate, in part, for example, as a consequence of everybody getting locked in their houses by their government. But however you set up the technology, there is just no doubt that if you talk about, strip out any of the kind of ideology where homeschooling tends to be associated with a kind of almost fundamentalist, Amish, Christian sort of separatism, which I think is unfair and unhelpful and inaccurate. Not that I, even though I have quite a strong affection for the fundamentalist Christians and the Amish, I say that, you take somebody like John Stuart Mill. J.S. Mill was taught by his father, James Mill. You talk about having a friend who is an economist or a friend from the Cato Institute. James Mill's friends were the leading lights of the Scottish and English Enlightenment. And so his godfather was the great utilitarian Jeremy Bentham. And one of his father's best mates was David Ricardo, who was, the second most eminent economist in English after Adam Smith. And indeed, James Mill preferred David Ricardo to Adam Smith and wrote a book on the contrasting philosophies of David Ricardo and Adam Smith. And the way he wrote the book is itself, if you will indulge me for a moment, the father, James, and his son, John Stuart, had an absolutely unvaried ritual in their homeschooling. Was they began every day with a long walk together. They would head out for, perhaps an hour from, they say, the time that John Stuart Mill was big enough to be able to keep up. It was a voluntary exercise, and over the course of that work, John Stuart Mill would tell his father everything he had read the day before and everything he planned to read in the day ahead. And he would make notes over the course of the day, and he would carry almost like little yellow post-it notes with him to have these discussions with his father. And his father would give editorial guidance about who he should read next and his opinion about the author and about their ideas. And as a consequence, James Mill told John Stuart Mill all of his thoughts and feelings about both David Ricardo and Adam Smith. And John Stuart Mill wrote them all down. And John Stuart Mill's notes became his father's book. And that book earned for James Mill the reputation. If you go to Wikipedia and look up James Mill, it will say that he is the third most influential economist in the English neoclassical tradition. So that is what you would call, John Stuart Mill had commenced learning Greek at home at the age of 3. He was fluent in Latin by the age of 8. He had read the entire classical canon by the age of 12. So the last thing I will, this compared, you mentioned our sort of comparative status against the Chinese. What people discovered when all the kids got sent home because of the COVID pandemic, the consequence was all of the day's teaching took place, as we are doing now, by Zoom online. And for the bright students, there were many of the brighter kids who were finishing the whole of the day's assigned tasks in 90 minutes. As I know from a young direct relative of mine. And so the parent, rings the teacher. Now this is a so-called elite private school. The parent rings the teacher and says, look, the difficulty we have is that my child is finishing all of the assigned work in less than 2 hours and is then sitting around wondering what to do for the rest of the day and has no other assigned tasks. So can you just tell me what should we make of this? And the teacher said, well, look, we work on the assumption that between roll call and play lunch and getting the kids organised and attracting their attention and dealing with disciplinary issues, there is only really about 2 hours of actual didactic learning taking place. So
per day. What a complete waste of a day.
Per day. So it does make, I think, a very strong case for homeschooling.
Well and truly. And I'm glad you touched on Marcus Aurelius. I was certain that it would come up at some point. And obviously, as I mentioned on the phone the other day, I always enjoyed watching The Outsiders with you and Rowan on there. I'm probably not as avid a watcher in its current format, but that could be time restraints as well. It's certainly not an indictment on the other participants, but I did like the dynamic between you guys, and I did like the Marcus Aurelius theme around the show. And in that spirit, people are now saying that the United States is around the stage where Rome collapsed. In its sort of the history of its empire. How close do you reckon that is to a fair comment?
Look, I wish I could be more optimistic than I am. The great obligation placed upon us by our cultural tradition is that we should follow the facts wherever they may lead us. As Socrates said, like a ship blown upon the water. No matter how discomforting, no matter how controversial, the result is our task as a human being is to use our independent reason based on the evidence we have to make judgments about what we are seeing. And I just would say that the Australian birth rate, COVID influenced, as I understand it, has fallen down to 1.57, less than 1.6. So put America to one side, just look at the Australian situation. The whole pattern of history is that demography is destiny. The willingness of a culture to reproduce is the most powerful indicator of whether it is a culture in ascent or decline. At the time of the Boston Tea Party, the average American female was having an average of more than 6 children. Today, the average American female is having roughly about the same as the average Australian. There are slight differences in different sort of cultural groups. But I don't think there's any example in history of a culture coming back from a birth rate of 1.5. Once it gets that low, you have to be at 2.1 just to keep at zero population. So when you're at 1.5, you're in a crisis. And so, that's just one indicator. If we go and look at the other indicators, when Australia and the United States are in the same situation, where when we hold an elite sporting competition, whether it's the NFL, NBA, baseball, rugby league, rugby union, cricket, the whole sporting administration is going into an paroxysms of identity crisis over which anthem to play. And all of the players are sitting around, and there's a significant cohort of Australian rugby league players, and the thing that they fear the most is the Australian national anthem. And once you're in a situation where a professional athlete earning several $1 million a year does not know whether to stand or kneel for the Star Spangled Banner, your story is over. Okay, let's be honest. If you don't even know whether you like or dislike your own country's flag, your chance of competing against 1.4 billion Han Chinese who are motivated, who are getting up early and going to bed late, who are generating productive outputs, creating value, generating foreign exchange surpluses, abolishing the one-child policy to encourage people to have more children. Our flag, the United States flag and the Australian flag, is exactly the same. It is a white canton on a white background. We have given up.
Yeah. Yep. No, that's a very fair assessment. And I'm in the libertarian with this little nationalistic streak where I kind of sit there scratching my head going, I'd love to be a real proud Aussie, but then I look at some of the stuff that goes on and this does my head in. What is wrong with you people? Do we have any backbone left? I personally don't believe there's very much backbone left in our political leaders whatsoever. There's nobody that stands out, certainly in the major two parties, that makes me think, yeah, okay, cool. I'd follow those guys over a wall at Gallipoli. Mark Latham was obviously affiliated with the Liberal Democrats, who I'm sort of affiliated with for a period of time, and I like a lot of his stuff. I know you guys have a lot of history. I like a lot of his stuff, but he still loves the state a little more than I do. David Leyonhjelm, I always liked certain elements of him as well. From a politician standpoint, Pauline, Bob Catter, you see some of them, and I can see elements that I like, but nobody gives me great confidence that if the shit hit the fan, I'd be going, that's the guy who I'd like to be in charge. Have you got anybody in particular that you look at in that capacity and you go, yeah, that's the guy or the girl, it's 2020, who would inspire that sort of confidence?
Look, I think pound for pound, the highest value member of any Australian Parliament is Mark Latham. I think he's, easily the best in terms of depth, just raw intellectual ability, the level of, you could develop a pie chart for every single member of Parliament which just had two slices of the pie. One is decisions which represent the genuine personal opinion of the politician. You might add it to it opinions which are dictated to them sort of against their will or instinct by their party. And then thirdly, you might have what might be described as the deep state orthodoxy, the opinions one must hold if they wish not to be destroyed by a group of intelligence agencies and sort of mainstream media apparatchiks. The truth is that the amount of independent judgment being exercised by our political leaders is a very thin slice of the pie. And indeed, there are literally hundreds of Australian members of parliament who have never exercised an independent judgment in their entire elected lives. They are just purely interchangeable factional widgets who are fighting over a salary, fighting over titles and emoluments, but there is zero analysis on behalf of citizens taking place. So you'll see, for example, you talk about Liberal and the Labor parties. I mean, I don't know where you are on Julian Assange, but I am a absolutely unflinching defender of Julian Assange and of WikiLeaks. And I believe he is an expression of the collapse of, for example, the American judicial system. And what I would say is, there is not, you go to the federal parliament, I say I can understand there are people who have a different opinion to me on Julian Assange. Much of my own, if I say my own tribe, is somewhere between, let's say my own tribe is centre-right libertarian. Yet we find there is not a single member of the Liberal Party in the federal parliament who is prepared to make a statement in defence of an Australian who is locked up in Belmarsh prison for doing his job very effectively as a journalist and publisher. Not one. And the reason is because they all understand very clearly that if they do, it will be a career-limiting move. So I would like to acknowledge multiple members of the Greens will stand up for Julian Assange. Barnaby Joyce and George Christensen will stand up for Julian Assange. Our little mate down in Tasmania, the former whistleblower, his name just escapes me. You've got a handful of members of the federal parliament who will stand up for an Australian citizen in a state of existential crisis, but the rest of them are just one undifferentiated blob, just like a mass of iron filings which have all been directed towards the big state and the security agencies. And they have said, look, we're going to crush WikiLeaks and kill Julian Assange in the process, and all of you will be sweet with it.
I suppose the end of it from there would be where they turn around and go, "Oh, you're next," to these people.
Yeah, well,
I like
exactly.
Assange. I like what he stands for. And it's like anybody. I don't think anybody agrees 100% on everything, but I look at Julian Assange and I go, courage of conviction, put it all on the line, still holding out, and really, if you've got nothing, they like to say, if you've got nothing to hide, why don't you want the state looking in? Well, why doesn't the state want us looking into what they're doing? And that worries me greatly. And I'd love to see some. I did the Eden Monero by-election. I didn't really do it expecting to get elected or anything, but I tend to throw myself at certain things to upset the apple cart somewhat. And there was a bit of backlash from the Liberal Party, who members informing me that there are more libertarians in the Liberal Party than there are in the Liberal Democrats, which I'm yet to see any of them show any courage. So I'm not sure that they can take that mantle. But I put them lower than Labor on the preference card. Now, that all that did was meant that out of 14 contenders, they were number 13 as opposed to number 12, and they were terribly offended. And when asked why, it was exactly what you've just described. They're all cookie cutters. They come out of the same mould. Nobody shows any conviction. George Christensen, I've spoken to on the phone a couple of times. He's sort of better. Somebody like Craig Kelly seems to be happy to rock the boat a little bit. But overall, there's just a complete lack of spine in, well, all the major political parties. And as much as the Greens annoy me, generally speaking, they at least have the courage of their convictions, no matter how many things we disagree on, which is kind of sad, really. I suppose that's why, to be fair, the extreme left are winning.
Yeah, I am more critical of my own side than the other side because I think it's good practice. I think that what we find is that the Liberal Party is misnamed.
Well and truly.
If it were, could be prosecuted for misleading and deceptive behaviour, it might be required to change its name. But it's sort of like it's a bit of a racket, if we're going to be honest, at the moment. Okay, at different times in its life, the Liberal Party has played an important role in sticking up for the citizen. And this is the fundamental divide. It's not between Liberal and Labor, it is between the forces of control in the big state and the major parties who have gone into a collusive relationship with the trade union movement, the bureaucracies, academia, the NGO sector, the multilateral agencies, and the mainstream media. Let's include the intelligence services. This cohort has figured out that if they do a deal with each other, they don't need the citizen. They don't need the citizen's approval. They can act, that they can limit the number of matters which are actually being resolved or determined by an election to a very, very small group of relatively symbolic and largely irrelevant bits of errata, whereas they can entirely outside the democratic project, the historical idea of a democracy based on consent of citizens, that is regarded by the progressive mind as a very old-fashioned, unhelpful and unnecessary encumbrance to the duty of the state, which is just a modern version of the most primitive collection of priests and sort of voodoo men and bone-pointing control freaks. And they are the guys and girls running the operation.
Yeah, it's pretty scary stuff. I must admit, when we still had David and Mark with the Liberal Democrats, I, as a bit of a fantasy football kind of guy, I'd sort of had a bit of a thing where I was like, why don't we reach out to Ross Cameron and we'd have a guy that's been turfed out of the right side of politics. We've got Latham, who's been turfed out of the left side of politics. We've got David in the middle. And the three of you guys go and run and take over the country, and then we basically just let all the people go back to having their freedom. What do you reckon?
Well, I'm flattered to be included in that exalted company. I won't obsess about Marcus Aurelius, but since you kindly expressed your appreciation for him, he has, again, in chapter 1 of the Meditations, he has a quote. He's giving thanks for his adopted brother, Verus, who introduced him to a number of people who he grew to love and appreciate, and for which he expresses thanks. But then he says, he was grateful for receiving the idea of a commonwealth governed by equality before the law, equal freedom of speech, and a fundamental commitment among leadership, above all else, to the freedom of the citizen.
Mm.
And that was his conception of what it meant to be the emperor of Rome. Above all else, the freedom of the citizen. And, you know, this is, I've just been reading, you know, for my sanity and pleasure, I have been just going back to the Minoan civilization in Crete. And the Minoans are, in truth, the first European civilization. I mean, we have civilizations emerging in Mesopotamia and the sort of Indus Valley, but the first European civilization is Crete. Crete gave us the first writing in Linear A and Linear B, neither of which we can translate. Crete, named by the English, the palace at Knossos, a palace of over 1,100 rooms, built and rebuilt successively between about 1900 and 1450 BC. Now, these guys produced what is described as the Pax Minoa, just as Rome produced the Pax Romana, 200 years of peace from Augustus through to the end of Marcus Aurelius and beyond. 200 years of peace. The Minoans produced 500 years of peace. And they were an incredibly advanced culture. They produced the most beautiful works of jewellery, of pottery, and of gold and silver. They made crystal vases of exquisite perfection. Yet their leadership, although they were very rich enough to build a 1,000-room palace, they showed no instinct to dictate to the other significant cities around the Mediterranean how they should live. They did not invade anyone. They had very few indications in the artwork which survives, which is the only base upon which we understand anything about their culture, since we can't read their writing. But the artwork...
To this day, nobody's deciphered it at all? They don't
still haven't figured it out.
Mate, okay.
Yeah, this would be, and this is what I would like to see.
I'll take a look later in the week and see if I can sort
it. See if you can crack it. But, you know, this is exactly, I would like a child going to and walking into an Australian high school, ancient studies, you know, whether it's a language course or ancient history, I'd like the teacher to say, one of you may decipher Linear A, the undeciphered script of the Minoans.
Yeah, right, wow.
But, you know, the point that I really want to make is that these guys believed in freedom. They believed in private enterprise. And we see this, for example, a city like Miletus, which is in Asia Minor in modern-day Turkey, a long way from the island of Crete, yet they are deeply influenced by Minoan architecture and by Minoan art, and yet there's no sense in which they exercised an influence which came from the excellence of their culture. They were not in the business of rushing around, forcing everybody else to comply with their wishes. And this modern impulse of the bureaucrat, where every time, if I go for a walk past Bondi Beach, as I did last night, I will have a massive neon line sign flashing at me. COVID restrictions apply, maintain social distancing. You walk past the local public school, you will have now, local public schools have discovered the power of a big electronic sign going 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, flashing free advertising of state bureaucracies into otherwise unsuspecting suburbs. And you can imagine the quality of thought which is being expressed in those signs. I can tell you that Goethe, regarded by some as the most soaring individual intelligence of the last 400 years, says that every day you should try and read a poem. I don't think you're going to find that poem on the screen of the electronic notice board of your local public school.
I'm a chef by trade and a libertarian, so naturally speaking, I tend to like isolation to a point, and I usually, by nature, socially distance. I've never wanted to be so close to people and interact with them as I do as soon as the government tells me that I'm not allowed to. Now, all of a sudden, I feel the need to invite lots of people to my house, and it's unbelievable. Maybe it could be reverse psychology or something. Maybe they did it just to make me friendlier.
Well, look, I sense you're in the top cohort of friendliness. I don't think you need to be made more friendly. But what I would say to you is that impulse to push back, I will sometimes retweet. I mean, you can find my tweets at Ross Cameron 4. As you know, I'm pretty desultory and in recent times lazy tweeter. But when I see somebody being suppressed, I feel obligated to tweet on their behalf. And that's partly what I would say I feel about Julian Assange, because I can see that he is being bullied by the biggest, toughest, meanest bullies in the playground. As a citizen, I feel your impulse, which is, who's next? Am I next? Are you next? Is my neighbour next? And again, we go to Marcus Aurelius, who says, the short sentences are often the most enduring from the ancient world. He says, endure freedom of speech. And he's the emperor. He's the one subject to the criticism. Yet he writes to himself as a sort of reminder, endure freedom of speech. And he gives thanks for what he calls the old comedy, in which he's referring to the Greek comedians. The Greeks effectively invented comedy in about 600 BC. And we have people like Sophocles and Aeschylus and Euripides who had a biting kind of wit, a cutting satire, and Marcus Aurelius, but they were brilliant. They expressed themselves. They were very funny. They were engaging. They were dramatic. And Marcus Aurelius, then the new comedy came along to replace the old, and the new comedy was a bit more sanitized, pasteurized, and homogenized. And Marcus Aurelius is looking back wistfully to the old comedy. And we see a number of Roman writers who likewise were right out on the edge in terms of freedom of speech, in terms of their willingness to cut down people in positions of privilege and power. And in the case of Catullus, I think it was a Roman poet who produced a satire which was so biting that the subjects of it, the whole family, I recall, committed suicide, which is, a bit on the rough end of the pineapple. But what still you have Marcus Aurelius is saying that there is a kind of cleansing effect. There is a health, almost like a hygiene effect of allowing people to say what they genuinely think and feel, because it holds the centers of power to account. And the last person I would cite on this subject is Friedrich Nietzsche, who trying to remember which of his works, it might have been Thus Spake Zarathustra. I can't remember, but I remember the quote. And he was talking about the fact that he likewise is one of these guys who used the pen as a rapier, who used it in certain cases as a kind of high ballistic weapon. But he said, look, just understand that I only apply the blowtorch of my pen to the triumphant. He says, I'm not picking out the weak and the vulnerable and the marginalized. You know, I am holding to account those who are in the entrenched centers of power. And that is my view on freedom of speech. I believe in a very, very broadly defined right for a person, as long as they put their name on it. In my opinion, you can say virtually whatever you like. I've got no respect for an anonymous Twitter account. But so long as you're prepared to, I don't block anyone who puts their name on it. Indeed, I don't block anyone who doesn't put their name on it. I'm such an extremist. But I say...
You do come across as an extremist, certainly.
On freedom of speech, you know... there are some things on which one, moderation is capitulation, and freedom of speech is one of them.
Yeah, no, I'm a big advocate for it. Just because I'm happy for you to say whatever you want to say, and I've had argument, as I'm sure you have, and people go, "Well, you're free to call me whatever you want." I really don't care. It doesn't mean I'm going to listen to you or engage with you for too long, but I'm happy enough for you to say it. You think I'm an arsehole, you think I'm an arsehole. You know, like that's you're entitled to that, no problem at all. I get it. It's not a worry. Where I start to worry is when everything's hate speech or everything is, like I had it out recently with somebody who was convinced that hate speech. And I said, listen, based on your definition of hate speech, if I go for one football team, you go for the other, that's hate speech, you know, like, oh, I hate Chelsea Football Club. You're all shit. I want you to die. That's sort of that's the comparison that we're getting to. It's getting that nonsensical that you're left arguing over absolute rubbish. And it's getting worse week on week. And I mean, obviously you had your free speech issues with, Sky News, The Outsiders, when you sort of get spanked for certain things and you're thinking, what is wrong with these people? That's the show's called The Outsiders. That's what it's actually about. I don't understand how even the network missed that. That had me absolutely baffled. But then I'm a bit of an absolutist. Say whatever you like. And, if you don't like me, you don't like me.
Yeah. Well, look, I believe in the right to hire and fire. That if a person's highest value is not getting sacked, then he should start his own company.
Yep.
If you're going to work for somebody else, you're always at risk of getting sacked, which I've managed on more than one occasion. And I sort of think if you've never been sacked, you're probably not trying hard enough. But the better answer is, if you've never been sacked, it might be because you've built your own enterprise and you're paying your own wage and hopefully paying someone else's as well. Yeah. And so it's hard for me to resent getting sacked by someone if I think, well, it's your company. You're responsible for its capital allocation, its recruitment decision. I may doubt the wisdom of certain personnel decisions. I may feel a sense of sadness about what it means for the scope of permitted speech. And I think this is, in truth, the much bigger question. And indeed, somebody like Jordan Peterson, came to prominence as a consequence of a crisis of free speech, where the Canadian government sought to introduce a law which would compel people, teachers, to use particular language, that they would be required by law to refer to certain groups of students in certain linguistic terms laid out in legislation. And Jordan Peterson said, "I'm sorry, I'm not up for it. You cannot compel me to use certain language." I mean, that's one step further than punishing a person for using a particular phrase or expression, but to compel a person to use a phrase or expression. This is sort of a North Korean regime, but coming out of Canada. And
as devil's advocate there, you could say, though, that, welcome to McDonald's, how may I help you, is compelling speech, and employees have the right to go, no. That's where I suppose the real simple argument where people would go, well, it's okay for them to do it. It's okay for them to do it. Obviously, I'd look at it and go, well, you're employed to do it. That's part of your role. But that would have been exactly the same argument the university used to Dr. Peterson, would have been along the lines of, well, you're employed here, and while here, you will use the language we wish you to use.
And look, you might take that approach. Then you would say what is taking place is certainly not education. It is something else. It requires a different noun and a different verb.
I can think of a few, but I won't use them for this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, whether you call it indoctrination or submission, teaching people to obey, teaching people to sacrifice their own reason in order to gain membership of the group. But indeed, this is what we see in every ASX listed company in Australia. At the moment you walk through the door, you must hang up your right to hold an opinion, because there are just multiple opinions which, if you express them, your career will be terminated, whether it happens on the first day or the following week or a month later. There's virtually no listed company in Australia, or indeed in the United States, where you could hang up a picture of Donald Trump, your cube at your desk, and expect to survive. So look, your question is an interesting one. Is the United States finished? And obviously the corporeal, the physicality, the corpus of the United States is 380 million people spread across half a continent. It's not going to disappear tomorrow, but the question is whether its trajectory can be saved. We have to say that Rome at the time of Augustus Rome was wobbling very badly after a succession of civil wars. But one bloke sort of steadied the ship. We'd have to say he was a bit of an authoritarian, but he certainly did act. He sought to govern in the interests of citizens, and they recovered from the wobbles. I don't know if you've ever had what we used to describe as the death wobbles on a skateboard, going down a steep hill.
I used to cycle competitively. I raced in Japan and things like that. I've had the death wobbles on a push bike at 80, 90 kilometres an hour going down a mountain. It's interesting.
Yes, I'm sure it concentrates the mind. But you get in this situation, as you can see with the design of some bridges, suspension bridges, when there is an earthquake, you can wind up getting a certain frequency in the fluctuation of the object, which gets a momentum of its own, which ends in destruction. And you can have that experience on a skateboard where you start moving and then you start really violently swinging from side to side, and then the whole thing unravels. And the question, what we're seeing now, whatever the final result in the US election, I'm inclined to kind of go down with the ship, if you like, with Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump was extraordinarily good for democracy, for the democratic project, for the United States, for the Western world, and easily the best performing Western leader. When you line him up against, Justin Trudeau, Angela Merkel, David Cameron, Boris Johnson, Tony Blair, Malcolm Turnbull, what is Little Miss New Zealand?
Ardern, Jacinda Ardern.
Jacinda.
What about ScoMo? ScoMo is a beacon of a shining light.
What you find is all of these people are just engaged in managed decline. There isn't anyone out of them who is saying, oh, well, this is our plan to turn this show around. Everyone is purely engaged in a process of accumulating debt, of increasing the size of the state as a proportion of the total economy, of constraining and restricting the freedoms of the citizen, of presiding over the destruction of educational attainment. There are some good things happening. Life expectancy seemingly continues to grow.
But is it a life if you're caged and whatevered? And just on that sort of concept, my father broke his neck many years ago. He was in a horse accident, and he had eight years of life after his accident. Everybody seemed so excited about the concept of getting 8 more years out of him, and he had a very different opinion. My father was, I'm not going to call him a stoic. I wouldn't go that far, but he sort of had some stoic tendencies, we'll say. And I think on some days he was really, really happy to get that extra 8 years, seeing some grandkids that he wouldn't have otherwise. And then there were other days where I think he really didn't see much quality of life out of that 8 years. So if you're getting a longer life expectancy and you haven't really got a life, is it a win? I don't know. I'm not convinced.
Yeah. Well, I suppose we won't know until we're in the situation ourselves. Marcus Aurelius would say that it's a great shame for the mind and the soul to give up before the body does. But, and we also have to acknowledge that a number of the greatest works of literature and philosophy have been produced by those in states of exile and even imprisonment. If we were to fantasize about what might be possible, we're in a situation where we now have levels of technical mastery across a wide range of sort of industrial disciplines. We know a lot more about ourselves. There's still vast things that we don't know. We still don't know any of the answers to the most basic questions, like where did the universe come from? Does a human being have a soul? What is the nature of consciousness? Why does a electron orbit around a proton? We don't know the answers. We don't know what gravity is. We can't translate linear A, Minoan script. We can't. We find it very difficult. There's a whole range of diseases that we don't have any quote cure for. But if, for example, we were able to unhorse the currently entrenched militarist powers who are determined to start new wars, place citizens in a permanent state of conflict with citizens of other countries and quasi-states. If you had, for example, the 21st century where we could turn our swords into plowshares, we could really dedicate ourselves to collaborating in a spirit of free opinion and free inquiry. If we could create freedom of trade, freedom of speech, if we could preserve as much space as possible for individuals to be different from each other. So John Stuart Mill, for example, says on Liberty that the presence of eccentricity is the canary in the coal mine. It's the indication that there is a culture of freedom, because the freedom is enough to allow that one bloke in your neighbourhood to be very different from all the other blokes. And indeed, David Hume addresses this issue. David Hume was both a great historian and probably the greatest philosopher in English. Hume's essay on the progress of the arts and sciences took a 2,500 year view on why we saw this periodic, unpredictable, seemingly occasional outpouring of genius in a particular small culture. So we know that, for example, from about, let's say 1650 BC to 450 BC, we had the flowering, the age of excellence of the Minoans. Then their civilization declined, collapsed completely, was overtaken by the Mycenaeans. Both of them collapsed completely in 1100. Then we had a 400-year dark age until Homer arrived in about 800. We had a gradual build-up over 200 years. Then we had the Athenian golden age, where we had sort of 250 years of just extraordinary, let's say. Then we had the flowering of Plato and Aristotle. Then Greece, in effect, being overwhelmed. We had 200 years of the Pax Romana from Augustus until after Marcus Aurelius. Then decline of Rome, falling into collapse. Then, we have in really 1400 AD, the Italian Renaissance begins, picked up by people like David Hume in the Scottish Renaissance, a flowering and then a decline. The question is why? Why? What is, and this is the question David Hume addresses in his essay on the progression of the arts and sciences. And he says that, and I was a bit startled when I read it the first time, where he says the first critical ingredient you must have for a flowering of artistic genius is you must have a government which places a great emphasis on freedom of citizens. He says
that
because,
makes sense.
yeah, he says you just do not get a flowering of artistic or scientific genius except if you allow a vast realm of of freedom of opinion, freedom of speech, freedom of way of life. And at the risk of labouring the point, Plato says that the very first philosopher was Thales of Miletus. Some say Thales. We don't know how it was pronounced in his own day, but he was the founder of what became known as the Milesian sort of philosophical school, which again, even though profoundly influential on the Greek philosophers, and Miletus was a Greek city, but it was not in mainland Greece. And Miletus, of course, had been deeply influenced by Crete and the Minoans. But the point is that Thales, the first philosopher, he and his family moved to Miletus from another Greek city, which was under the regime of a tyrant. And Thales's parents said, "We cannot live with tyranny." And they moved deliberately to Miletus because they were a family which had an appetite for freedom of opinion and freedom of speech. And it was in that environment that they gave birth to Thales, who conceived and created Greek philosophy.
Yeah, right. That's very impressive. Impressive family. I'd like to think that I embody some of that spirit, and I'm sure you do as well. There's certainly, I find a lot of the desire for liberty and freedom is innate in people. There are certain people that really you may have different experiences with people, but I find that some people are more naturally inclined to be desperate for that freedom and to be left alone. I'd rather earn $40,000 a year in my own little business than take $100,000 a year working for somebody else. For me, there's just no question for me that I would. If they're the two choices, I'm working for me every time. But on the flip side, there are also other people who do feel the need where they want that security and that they want the state to look after them, state or somebody else to look after them. Is that something that you sort of see as being fairly valid? Is that a societal problem? Is it inbuilt?
Yeah, well, I think it's one of the most. If we talk about what are the fundamental questions, what are the questions that don't go away? John Stuart Mill says that the fundamental question of history is the dispute, the struggle between the state and citizen. The Hebrews would have said that the fundamental struggle is between the individual and his God. You are touching on this fundamental tension between the individual as a unique creation and the seductive appeal of security, which comes from membership of a tribe, a party, a faction, perhaps even a country. Edmund Burke, one of our favourites, great English philosopher and member of Parliament, writer, he said that all true, healthy, patriotic feeling begins with the sense of attachment that individuals feel to what he called that little platoon, which is your neighbourhood, your football team, if you like, that it begins there, your school PNC, and builds from there. Look, I would say that the perfect world is one where we, Jesus of Nazareth said, "Render to Caesar what is Caesar's." Caesar deserves something. I'm not a complete anarchist. At times, I reckon I would go, I'm moving in that direction, under provocation.
I've been accused of that recently as well. I can't imagine what's causing it.
Yeah, so look, I would say, fairly proudly, certainly up until recently, an Australian. Yet, like you, I object to being bossed around, and you talked about your father's difficult experience towards the end of his life. Question is, what does it mean to be human? What are we aspiring to? What is the quality of life, which is our ideal? And John Stuart Mill's argument was that each one of us is constructed differently. We certainly have, billions of individual cells. We've got, let's say, 20,000 individual coding genes on our double helix, which give us not just different colour hair or no hair at all in the case of some.
This is by design, purely by design.
By design, okay. No. I wasn't making any reference to you, Freedom Chef. You're overly sensitive. I'm rapidly.
I'm very sensitive. Yeah.
But no, the impulse to control must be resisted. But nothing good comes from it. What we have to create is the least possible control, the fewest possible regulations, the shortest possible tax act, the smallest number of bureaucracies. We wish to preserve the greatest realm of privacy. We wish to encourage the greatest accumulation of private wealth, however distributed. But most importantly, we wish to preserve the freedom of, it was Alfred the Great, not called the Great by accident, who sort of unified several of the disputing kingdoms of like Mercia and Wessex and Northumbria to create to resist the Danish invasion. But he says in his will that it is right that the Englishman must henceforth, from this day until eternity, the Englishman must be as free as his own thoughts. And I think that's probably the highest and purest. It's the Freedom Chef.
There you go. Sorry. Yeah, mate. Oh, look, 100%. And freedom is everything in life and in what we're going on. And here we are in 2020, mate. And with COVID-19, we haven't really hit on it yet, other than glowing neon signs. How much of our freedoms are they stealing, and at what rate? It's okay because climate change is going to have us all dead in. I think we're up to, it's only 12 months away now before we're all dead of climate change. So it's probably not that big of a deal. But where do you sit on? What are your final thoughts on those couple of rabbit holes? COVID-19, is it as serious as is being made out?
Yeah, well, I wish the final thought could be more, something more edifying. But I think everything we study, when you say, okay, well, what do you make of COVID-19? I say, okay, what is the process by which we understand this phenomena? What is it? Well, we know it's a virus. Okay, what is a virus? A virus is the fourth on the traditional tree of life, we have the archaea, the bacteria, the eukaryotes, which happily is you and me. And then we have a fourth kingdom, which is usually attached with a dotted line to the tree of life because it behaves differently to the other three, and that is the viruses. We know that the average mammal has over 300,000 different individual strains of virus in their body. That's species of virus. And out of those 300,000, they are producing not hundreds of millions, but billions of individual examples of the virus once it gets inside the body. It's almost certainly the case that if I said to you, look, I've got a pill you can take which will remove every virus from your body right now, it is doubtful that you would last 24 hours without the presence of the virus in the body. You and I have evolved since the very beginning of life, assuming the orthodox story is correct. 400, what do they say? You know, life, the first division of the first cell. It was a long time ago. We have evolved to live with viruses.
Yeah.
And this one is pretty, as viruses go. I mean, the Antonine plague, there's arguments about how many people it killed in the era of, it killed Marcus Aurelius' brother Verus, probably killed Marcus, swept through the Roman garrison at the city of Aurelius on the Danube, wiping out big chunks of the Roman military. The plague of Athens in 430 BC, killed 100,000 Athenians over the course of one summer. They didn't have enough firewood to cremate the dead. Here we have a virus which has a mortality rate of certainly well below 1%, and has virtually negligible impact on anyone under the age of 55. Indeed, pretty minimal under the age of 75. Yet we find it has been, gun violence in Chicago has killed more than 30 times as many people as the coronavirus has. And then we've seen a whole range of countries, particularly the East Asian nations of China, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, showing very high levels of resistance to corona without need for any kind of vaccine. So I just feel like in what Mill described as this great, epic, enduring, unending struggle between the citizen and the state over who actually runs the operation, COVID has been leapt upon as this magnificent opportunity to assert control, and I think it has resulted in an absolutely gratuitous destruction, not just of wealth, but of morale. And I don't see, if you talk about, what causes the end of cultures, there's a range of events, mass migration, natural disasters, earthquakes, volcanoes. Disease is certainly one. But in this case, the cure is much worse than the disease.
Yeah, it's a strange time. What I'm sort of hoping is it may just spark the rebellion we need to take us all back to the top and where we should be and where we shouldn't be. But who knows? Fingers crossed. We might have to throw you at the prime ministership, or you're a bit more articulate than I am with these things.
Mate, I reckon you're on a roll. I think you're doing a terrific job. I congratulate you. I'm getting right behind FreedomChef. I'm all yours.
Oh, Thank you. I'm getting all warm and fluttery. I was going to bring up. You did an interview with Dia Beltran last week. Have you got any upcoming other appearances on sort of more of this little alternative little media sort of space? You know, you've got Ricardo Bosi, who I know you're familiar with the Arc. You've got a couple of young blokes who do Carnage House Productions. They're pretty interesting. Daisy Cousins does some stuff. You know, have any of these guys sort of given you a hard time about participating with them yet?
Yes. Look, I think the answer is I don't have right now. I'm just working on paying bills. And
do you want some of mine? I'll share with you if you want.
Yeah, no, there's plenty to go around. There is no shortage of bills to pay. That's what I find, that we are trying to fund a pre-COVID cost structure on a post-COVID revenue stream as a nation, and that cannot last. And so I think all of us have got to, just make sure we can do the basics before, in my case, we do the razzle and tazz. So we shall see.
Yeah, look, for fingers crossed. And obviously, you've mentioned your Twitter handle. Is there any other social media or anything you specifically use for anyone who wants to sort of drink at the bar of Ross Cameron? Or
look, at Ross Cameron 4 is on Twitter. The truth is, I don't even really promote it. Sometimes I wonder whether it's worth reading. The only thing in my favour is there seems to be a relatively low standard being applied across the board. So, even I might have something useful to say.
Look, if I'm sure if you're at a low standard, I'm in all sorts of trouble, mate. I'm in all sorts of trouble.
Well, look, the last thing I will say before good night is I am here because you can hear that siren in the background.
They're coming to get you. They've heard you talking to me. Now it's on.
It's interesting because the siren as a technology is incredibly inefficient. It's a classic state technology where I bear absolutely no relationship or risk to that emergency vehicle, yet they have to reach thousands and thousands of people who have got absolutely nothing to do with the physical driving, so it's a very inefficient technology in that sense. But it serves just to remind everyone who's in charge. But anyway, all I will say to you is I'm here. I say yes in a way out of a sense of guilt for not adequately putting my own shoulder to the wheel or to the yoke. But you're turning up every week. I think you get points for that, and I'm wishing you every success.
Oh, look, I appreciate that, and I certainly appreciate you coming on here. I'm sure our little audience will be more than happy to hear everything that you've got to say, and hopefully going forward we can see more of you jumping back into the public spotlight. I'm sure there's plenty of us freedom-loving dissidents that would be more than happy to certainly support you in that endeavour. So that would be really fantastic if we could see more of Ross Cameron on all those different platforms I just mentioned, because they're all great and I like all the guys involved. Thank you for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I always feel smarter after I talk to you guys. And, I might reach out and see if we can get the other original outsiders to do a little gig each as well. And who knows, we could make a super special out of it. That could be fun.
Well, good luck. I wish you well. I hope you succeed. I hope they say yes with alacrity.
It would be good fun anyway. All right, yes. Thank you, Mr. Ross Cameron. You have a great evening. I appreciate your time. Resolute TV audience, this is going out on season 3, episode 1, and that'll be out in 2 weeks' time, so we can look forward to that then. Thank you very much.
Hey guys, this is now segment 2 for episode 1 of season 3's Resolute TV with Andrea. This is a great discussion between two like-minded individuals. Tell me what you guys think in the comments below.
Rightio, guys. Series 3, Resolute TV. We made 20 episodes. We're on to our 21st. We've got Ross Cameron for episode 1, and we've got the lovelier Andrea Tokaji. Now, it sounds like I've got a couple of people here who both have been unceremoniously speared from the Liberal Party, which actually makes me like them better because the Liberal Party is pretty low on my priority list these days. But welcome back, everybody who's coming back for the third series, it's fun. As we all know, I do this stuff for fun and to rattle a few cages. Now, the lovely Andrea here, as I just mentioned, is... well, a former Liberal Party member and advocate, and she's also a lawyer, an anti-slavery expert, a human rights advocate. Are you a lawyer and a professor or something or other else? You're going to get into it in a minute for me. Head of the Christian Legal Society. You're a very busy young lady. And your most recent excitement has been this current Western Australian election, and you were an endorsed member of the Liberal Party.
Yep.
And then they disendorsed you. How are you, Andrea? Thank you for coming aboard. Happy to see you.
Thanks so much for having me.
You're a delight. We've been talking for the last few days. It's been fantastic. But, mate, what happened? What's the Liberal Party's problem other than the fact that, as I've been saying for quite some time, that there are pussies?
Well, you're doing something right when you're exercising your freedom of speech. And frankly, unfortunately, that is what got me into deep water. So you remember what it was like in April last year, right? April 2020. COVID had just hit. We were all in lockdown globally, and all of us were asking questions, right? And so I am a legal academic, so I'm working towards becoming a law professor. The way I dealt with lockdown is I just started reading and researching and reading and researching. I ended up writing this 3,000-word paper with all my questions, kind of questioning the whole thing. Like, are we okay with these lockdowns and these measures? And are our fears taking away our freedoms and rights? And of course, I question things like, where did COVID come from? What was its purpose? Where is it heading? And the legal ramifications. It was more of an opinion piece, not a legal paper. So, it was my personal rant on paper, people. Okay, come on. I did throw in there this link. So I had been reading in my research about the effects of 5G on people's health. So I'm thinking, okay, if 5G is rolling out at the moment during COVID, everyone's in lockdown, and it's affecting people's health. So I read some studies on it, looked at some evidence, both anecdotal and otherwise for it, and I put that question in there. If 5G is being rolled out at the moment, and if it impacts people's health, of course, depleting their immune system, how is that going to affect the spread of COVID? Are we more likely going to catch what we thought was a virus that's contagious? Are we more likely to catch this virus that's contagious if our immune system is under attack as a community? So this is a question I posed in my 3,000-word essay. This was my public rant during COVID shutdown, April 2020, and this is what got me disendorsed.
Well, I've got to say, look, congratulations on the disendorsement. Usually I always take the side of those that are a little bit anti-establishment. And from what you've said, and I haven't read the 3,000-word article on my...
Better.
I'll put it on my to-do list now that the AndreaTokaji.com website's up. I'm sure it'll be all there for me to find. But you do post some very reasonable questions. And look, and the 5G thing, I had heard some rumours about it. You see some YouTube videos, you hear an article, you whatever. Whether or not there's any basis for that fact, I certainly don't see any problem with anybody questioning it. The technology screams this is worth questioning, and how dare you question it and then mention it publicly? That's a disgrace. It'd be like, I don't know, maybe questioning the value of, fatty food or McDonald's on people's health. You can't do that. These corporations are very upset.
Yeah.
Like how possibly. I actually saw an article the other day. They're talking about now putting Diet Coke in the same category of health standard as orange juice. And, I'm watching all these mums online, people I know, because heaven forbid I knew mums and people who are not politically aligned, and they're all having meltdowns, rightfully so, questioning this. And they're going, what sort of stupid bastard? I said, it's not about whether they're stupid or not. It's about how many shareholdings in Coke they've got. Why is this so hard for people? You can't say that. Yes, that's what's going on. And we know what happens with the political class as well. Whether or not 5G directly affects people regarding COVID, that period of time, I'm not surprised that there weren't far more whaling conspiracies. I don't know if you saw today, Pete Evans, the TV chef, who caused all the problems, being a bit anti-vax and activated almonds or something. I actually did a legalising marijuana event with him at one stage. And I agree with some of his stuff, disagree with some of his other stuff, and I'm sure he feels the same about me, as you and I will probably agree and disagree. But watching the mainstream media melt down over any of you guys, to me, is hilarious. It just baffles me, mate. Like, you're a smart woman. You've got a list of accolades. I've been researching you for quite some time, and you've worked your ass off. You're not a dummy. There is no doubt about it. You're not an idiot. You've obviously done your homework, and the Liberal Party have lost you over you asking some questions they don't approve of. Doesn't surprise me, but what was your next step? What was the process for you after that, this disendorsement?
Yeah, look, I mean, in the moment, I got a phone call from the Libs leader here in WA, and it was, you're disendorsed. There was no due process, no conversation, which obviously frustrated me. I'm a lawyer. I'm a trained lawyer. My response was, on what grounds? Let's talk this out. Of course, they weren't willing to talk it out. And of course, we know that during an election, these things can become volatile. I didn't want them to. And it didn't, as far as I'm concerned, because, I kept my dignity. I just wanted to understand what was going on. But they made the decision to put their fear of losing an election above freedom of speech in principle. They didn't allow due process or my right of reply. And also, they disendorsed me based on something that I wrote 5, 6, 7, 8 months prior to being endorsed as a candidate. I did not say these things in my capacity as a candidate, and it was asking a question and exploring a theory. So it is unfortunately the way it turned out. But you know what? The moment my sponsor, so to speak, so a member of parliament who was my supporter and approached me and asked me to run in the Liberal Party, saw something in me, he said to me, look, this is what's about to happen. And I said, look, if they don't have faith in me, they just need to do what they need to do. As soon as it happened, I had people on the phone saying to me, you have to run as an independent. All of the Liberal Party here in WA know how hard I've worked, and I've been called the hardest working candidate this election for a reason. I've been working this politics law space in Canberra for the last 12 years. I've picked up a few things, and I'm a strategist, I'm a strategic thinker, and I actually kind of love it in one way. I don't enjoy the politicking of politics, the whole name dropping and personalities and, all of the wielding and dealing. That aside, I think there's wonderful opportunities to serve your community, make your community better, and, strategically reach for better goals together, collaboratively. And so I think we've lost a lot of that in modern day politics. We've lost the art of political debate. We're losing, the democratic, rough and tumble of politics. Instead, it's about whoever's got the most money and, whoever the two-party preferred system chooses to back, that's who's going to get elected, because they're the ones that's going to be seen. They're the ones that are going to be heard, and they're the ones that have the donors backing them. So, I've been in this space, but I've seen it get worse and worse, actually. And it's really disappointing. One of the reasons I continue being involved is I am a refugee kid. You know, I grew up in communism, and we need to be real about what's going on. We actually don't have as many democratic rights in this nation as we once did. They are under threat, and that's what scares me, and that is my fuel to keep going and keep fighting, because we cannot let it go.
Mate, and I think that's fantastic. You grew up in Romania, no?
Yeah. So when I was a little kid there, Ceausescu was the dictator. So communism came through Eastern Europe through World War II, and we were Hungarians living in Romania, which made it a bit more complicated. And we lived on food rations in the 80s. We lived in a world where we had no outside information. All of our information was controlled by the dictator. All the TV channels were just his speeches, you know, and our time was controlled. 6 days a week, you had to either go to school or work. Every second Sunday, you had to work for communism. And so he controlled your time, controlled how much you received. He controlled, you know, everything there was no individual rights or choices. The first thing that communism does is eliminate the academics, the entrepreneurs, the thinkers, you know, and that is scary. You know, that is, it starts with the subtlety of stopping people saying what they really think. And we see that in the PC culture around us today.
Yeah, and it's growing rapidly. And as you pointed out earlier, the Liberal Party endorsed you after you wrote that article. That's correct? So that means they either didn't do their due diligence, or they did their due diligence, didn't actually think it was important at the time, and then shit the bed later on. Oh, did I just...
Look, to be fair, I mean, I've written a few articles. Most of them are around anti-trafficking, slavery, human rights issues, freedom of religion. And I had a list of them, I think about 12 of the academic articles that I'd written on, you know, the bio that I gave them. I didn't put this one on because I didn't think it was controversial and I didn't think it was important. So I didn't hide it, but I don't know if they went digging for it. But yep, absolutely right. It didn't come up as an issue until I think they realised how successful my campaign had become. And of course, there's also factional kind of dramas that go on within a party, and the left faction of the Liberal Party receiving a lot of joy right now in Western Australia, let's just say.
Yeah, this Zach Kirkup fellow, I mean, just how big a communist is he?
I wouldn't know about that. But look, he has released some policies that are not traditionally liberal in nature. You know, he's not a traditional conservative, and so and I think also this election is unique. It's a COVID election. You know, everyone's worried about how we're going to move on from COVID. Is Zach Kirkup, if he's elected, going to be as harsh as Marxist Mark, as I call him? Because yeah, we've had really strict laws over here, rules, and at the moment, we're all meant to be wearing masks, right? But there is no COVID in Western Australia. So we've had shutdowns and lockdowns that are fear-mongering, I would say, because there's no evidence of COVID, and it's a just-in-case measure. At this time, businesses are losing $10,000 a week. That's one business per business. So how are we justifying not only the economic downfall, but the impact on families long term, the men's and women's mental health who own these businesses, you know, the families who are struggling already? So it's a disproportionate measure, I think, and a disproportionate response to an unknown and unquantifiable fear.
100%. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I find most of the COVID stuff to be a mass overreaction. I also find, and again, as I sort of explained to you on the phone, I do the whole bogan thing, and I just downgrade things into really simple. And people go, things aren't that simple. And I go, only because you like to overcomplicate them. Globally, there's 2.5 million people have died of COVID. We need to lock the whole world down. Hang on, 5.5 million died of starvation in 2020 or 2019, whichever year it was. And so double. Yet I imagine, and again, I'm not an economist, I'm friends with a couple of economists. I imagine if they spent half the budget that they've spent mucking around with COVID so far on, I don't know, sending food to the people dying of starvation, they could save 5 million, and they'd probably still only have the 2.5 million that have kind of died of COVID. And I'll say kind of died because most of, when you see the numbers and you see the amount of people that have died of COVID over 70, and again, people go, you're a libertarian, you're a harsh asshole, you're a bastard, you mean blah, 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 blah. I'm used to all those names. I'm just a harsh realist. And I go, people over 70 die of all sorts of stuff, and it's not because I go, I want to see them die. It's just that I accept the fact that people over 70 die. Most people from COVID are dying over 70, not all, but most. And people are dying of starvation of all ages at double the numbers. Now, that's oversimplifying it, apparently, but we don't need to spend trillions of dollars on finding a vaccine or creating vaccines or rolling out vaccines. We just need to get all the wasted food that we produce each year in Australia and send it to people who are starving. If that's too simple, I've ended an awful lot of online arguments using that argument and just saying, well, yeah, we save 5 million with half the investment and not everybody's shut down. I don't understand why that is so complicated. Pretty basic.
Yeah, you're right. And the reality is during COVID lockdowns around the world, poverty has risen. I understand that over 160 million extra people have delved into below the poverty line status. We've also got more trafficking of vulnerable cohorts. So we've got on top of the whole elitist, they're comfortable because, that we're all in this together. Yeah, right. We're not, we can't comparatively say that. So for example, the stars making all these YouTube videos and money off it and, just finding a new way to, spruik their industry basically is a totally different case to the family who lives in the Indian slums who has to deal with police literally beating them because they're not allowed to on the street, but the street is their home. So they're being told to go home and they're being beaten for it. Where are they meant to go? They're homeless. So the reality is it's sent shockwaves throughout the world. And in one sense, I think we've needed this shake-up because, our economy, the world's focus, I think a few good things have come out of COVID. People have started to realize that the way we've been living life and doing life is just over the top, not okay. We're getting back to basics. We're saying, let's spend more time with family. Let's have better perspective on what is life and what we can expect out of each other. And I think those things are positive. So, for all the horrible things, all the deaths and all the trauma that it's brought to people's lives, I think we need to learn some philosophical lessons out of this as well.
Oh, mate, look, and that's out of every negative, there's a positive, and I look at your work in the human trafficking space and the advocacy that you've been involved in. And again, I sit there and I look at how much heat you've copped over the last few weeks. And it's like, you asked about 5G towers, but there's been years of amazing positive work that you've done. And I'm going to give you the free rein to just give a bit of a rundown of everything you've done. Because one of the first things that put us in contact was I've been doing a little bit of research into child sex trafficking and all those sorts of things, not because I'm looking to invest, but because I'm looking to stop it for anybody who's going to be funny in the comments. Everybody who knows me knows how much I hate that sort of shit. I can't stand the seedy underworld of politicians and bureaucrats and lawyers and all these things and seedy underworlds of that sort of thing. And you've been dead set front and center in the fight head on. So, mate, I'd love to know about what got you into it, how you've got into it, what have you done, where have you tackled, who have you fired off at that's deserved it, mate, because that's actually real world shit not questioning 5G, like questioning who cares. That's not real world.
Yeah, look, it's interesting because, I mean, that's not, it wasn't really a career choice per se. I just kind of fell into it. So I suppose it does go back to where I came from. As refugees, we were escaping from one country to another, and we were caught and interrogated, threatened with treason, and we were moments away from that being our reality. And I was moments away from being thrown into an Romanian orphanage, you know. But by the grace of God, I would say, did I not only survive, but I came here to a free democratic country where I can study, I have the freedom to say what I want, and I have a pretty good life, right? So my thing is, I want to help others. You know, to be fair, unfortunately, these days, children growing up, they are all susceptible to either online grooming or in-person grooming. They're all susceptible to sexual exploitation. Unfortunately, it's very much in our society. And, you know, some would argue that there is a public corporate grooming that goes on of children, from even sexualized images in their cartoons and the way stories are being told and things like that, to get them used to sexualized words or images, and that is a form of public corporate grooming. So it is a huge issue because, first of all, society needs to behave in a way that we put the best interest of the child first. And of course, we often don't. We put money, profit, you know, whatever else first, which results in these poor decisions, I would say. And of course, the compromise is deep in corruption. So for me, my journey has been a long one. So in 2009, I started advocating, doing anti-trafficking work and speaking at conferences, doing my research, writing legal recommendations to several parliaments and going to these committee hearings and meeting with members of parliament and trying to amend the laws, because I realized that, you know, what's happening in our society is often affected by either A, laws not condemning this behavior, or B, laws actually approving this behavior of, you know, corporate responsibility or the common person. And in my research, what I focused on is prevention. So I did that through human rights advocacy in Australasia region, and I did that through education, human rights education in the Australasia region, and then human rights lobbying. So advocacy, education, lobbying. Advocacy is more, you know, on behalf of cohorts and individuals. Education, again, into communities in Southeast Asia, to leaders. I mean, I ran one education session for pastors in Thailand, and in the audience, these are, you know, good folk, they're taking care of communities. They had just sold their 12 or 13-year-old girl to a guy in China because they wanted a better life for her. So for all intents and purposes, they thought they were doing a good thing for their daughter.
Yeah.
And without education, without an understanding of what's truly going on, they made her so vulnerable. I understand that in a few years, this man, once he got a child out of her, just rejected her. So there are massive consequences to these actions. And so the parliamentary lobbying took me to understand that, you know what, we've legalized prostitution. We're basically saying it's okay to exchange money for the body that we've commodified. And so in the legalization process, we've set a standard. So then the debate comes of decriminalization. Is that a good way to go? But if we criminalize it, then, you know, it's going to victimize the working girl. And is, you know, sex work real work? And, you know, it's a massive debate, right? But at the end of the day, Sweden rolled out in 2009 what's now referred to as the Nordic model. So they on the basis of rights of women, women's equality, they rolled out this standard to say that, you know what, the woman is legally allowed to sell her body, basically, but it's illegal for a man to buy it. I know that's messing with your head a bit right now, but
I'm able to buy all the women I want.
so the purchase, the commodification became the crime, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Criminalize the woman's actions, obviously she's often a victim, and so the psychological and human rights legal studies that have been done around prostitution has found that, you know, women who are selling themselves on the street the stats are ridiculous. A high percentage, over 50%, are homeless. They were sexually abused as children. They are from low socioeconomic families. You know, they're runaways, and they were groomed as children, or, you know, mid to late teens, so 15, 16, 17, 18, into the industry by someone around them. So, and in America, unfortunately, the American government writes a trafficking in persons report every year, and they point out how severe trafficking is in other countries, and they don't report on themselves. And it's been found that America are the greatest condoners in one way, as well as vessels or vehicles of human trafficking. So one of the new trends is, you know, these young guys who basically pimp out their girlfriends in malls, you know what I mean? And they're using apps to make, you know, appointments with the clients. So it's huge. So we're having young girls, younger and younger, as young as 13, kind of being groomed by boyfriends a bit older than them, and being told, if you love me, you'll do this for me. And unfortunately, because young girls are so sexploited, as it was, and groomed to be used to certain images and behaviors and words, for them, it's sexual and, well, it's it's a really complex area, psychologically, you know, legally, but at the end of the day, we need to be about protecting the vulnerable. And I do believe women should have a choice what they do as a profession. But I can't imagine many women sitting at school going, yes, would love to be a prostitute when I grow up. And that's going to fulfill all my dreams and my career goals.
Now, come on, as if every woman you went to school with didn't want to do that as a job.
It brings so many risks with it, right? To the individual. Other studies have shown that the psychological trauma of a prostitute, of a woman who works as a sex worker, is massive. It's the same as a person with a brain injury or a trauma victim. So they have post-traumatic stress disorder, they have anxiety and depression, often from being kicked and abused by clients, being forced into doing things. It's also been found that their bodies literally they can't stay in the industry very long because it literally damages their insides. So, I mean, in what other profession is being raped and bashed and kicked and spat on and bitten and all of that okay and legal, right? But in the sex industry, it's all okay and legal in the sense that it never gets reported and dealt with. And of course, some of these women have also unfortunately found and been faced with death. They've been either strangled or abused in a way that they've lost their lives. How is that okay?
No. Again, and I love the fact that we've just gone straight into a hardcore subject, because it's easy to talk about the easy stuff, you know. And look, the libertarian in me sort of, as always, it's a woman's choice if that's what she'd like to do. But I'm also a big advocate for children need to be protected. And anybody who spent 10 minutes with me knows how protective I get of all people, you know, all kids, they're kids. Fuck, what is wrong with people? And, you know, I sort of look at it and I go, if you're a grown adult woman who chooses that type of work or has got yourself into a situation where that's, you know, as long as it's of your free will and people go, well, oh, well, if you're that desperate for money, how is that free will? What do people go to work for? People don't go to McDonald's and flip burgers because that's their free will, and I've always wanted to go to McDonald's. They do it because there is a certain gun to your head in society financially that means people do jobs they don't want to do, and they take on roles they don't want to do, or they sell things they don't want to sell, including their bodies. And it's just such a messy space, and I look at it from a legalization standpoint and again, every workplace has its ailments, but at least if you're in sort of a brothel that's somewhat protected, it might be the good word. There's, often depending on how they run, a security guard, somebody there making sure everybody toes the line, so to speak. It's got to be better than these poor girls that are out doing it in the streets and down back alleys. And certainly, at least then, you would like to think that they're of age and age to consent, because for me, a massive thing in all areas of life is consent. It doesn't just go with sexual; it goes with financial. Don't steal my tax. I don't consent. Leave me alone. But the kids stuff really worries me. The adults, I must admit, I get a bit harsher on adults, and I go, listen, you're an adult, sort your life out. If you don't want to do it, don't do it. I'm a bit harsher. It's just the libertarian in me where I kind of go, listen, you've got to take some responsibility for your own actions. But we treat people under the age of 18 as children, and they need to be protected like they're children. That's one of the very few uses I see for government. And and I don't know whether you watched that little video I sent you the other day via text. That's one area that has really irked me over the last probably 6 months. Is that there is quite a lot of innuendos, evidence. I haven't seen all the evidence of these, what would we call them? People high up in society that are probably supposed to be doing the protecting, not really protecting as they should, which again makes me question government's validity and these societal structures. I've got more faith in you saving somebody from a shit situation, or me going and just literally going, all right, come on, we'll go solve that, than I do for these institutions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, look, it does, but life is so much more complicated than that. So one of the things I used to do is look at the regulatory systems in each state and territory. So let's take ACT, for example, and your arguments for decriminalisation or legalisation are very common. Surely it's better if we regulate the industry. Surely the women are healthier. Unfortunately, there's a gap between the legislation that's passed and the enforcement thereof. So any law is only as good as its enforcement. So how does a regulation get enforced? It's often by the executive. So we've got, in Australia, we've got the separation of powers. So we've got the legislature, which is Parliament, and they make the laws. They write in black and white what we should be and should not be doing, our rights and responsibilities. We've got the executive, which are the government departments and all the public servants, such as police and ACCC and all the rest of them, that kind of enforce this regulation. And then, of course, we've got the judiciary that kind of decide, well, what does the law say, and let's apply it to these facts, and therefore our decision sets a new precedent, and, oh, look, we just made a new law out of that. So that imbalance, separation of powers theory works really well if it's held in balance. So these regulatory bodies obviously fall under the executive. And so the executive often, in this instance, with checking whether brothels are working well or not, for example, in the ACT, it's nurses that are meant to go in and do health checks with the girls, the prostitutes that work in these brothels, so the sex workers. And my investigation found that there were 0 health checks being done in 0 brothels. So in the ACT, each brothel was meant to register. So they're meant to say, yeah, we're working as a brothel. So often what would happen is a guy who ran a brothel would have his front business. So he would have like the Aussie girls, but then he would have the sidey when he used to have clients that he built up trust with, and they were asking for different kind of girls or younger or whatever. He would take them to these unregistered brothels. And so that's how there was, unfortunately, a 17-year-old sex worker that overdosed in one of our brothels in Canberra. 13 and 14-year-old Thai girls found in the brothels in Canberra. And there are also, of course, kind of unintended consequences with not only well-intended legislation, but sometimes poorly written legislation. For example, most people are for anti-discrimination laws. But again, if the law is written poorly, it's going to have a bad outcome. So in the ACT, they passed this law saying that a sex worker, a girl who works in a brothel, cannot discriminate against any client, whether he has STDs or any other kind of sexually transmitted issues, right? And vice versa. So if a girl working in a brothel has any sexually transmitted diseases or whatever else, she cannot be discriminated against. So, I mean, yes, yay for non-discrimination, because yes, we want equality for all and, to stand up for the minority, but this is ridiculous. So, I mean, and who keeps the finger on their pulse with these ridiculous laws,
Well, how many politicians and public servants were in the brothel with a 13-year-old Thai girl at the time? And that's usually where I start sort of getting really out of sorts, because there's a reason these things exist and they've gotten away with, and it's because the checks and balances that you've spoken of, that people put a lot of faith in. I'm probably far too jaded to put faith into these institutions. I put faith in individuals. So I look at it and I kind of go, if that's what's running at the back of this brothel, somebody's allowing it and they can't pretend they don't know about it. It's no different to, and I don't know what your neighbourhood's like, but I've lived in places where the guy up the road selling drugs. Illegal drugs. Now, I don't judge, I don't care, do what you want, as long as you're consenting. I couldn't give a monkeys. But legally, the guy up the road selling drugs, and the police are saying, we can't do anything about it. So really, what's the point? What's the point in all that nonsense? I would argue that the same lack of faith would cause me to think, well, what would make me think that the judiciary or the politicians, the parliament, why would they protect and serve any better than the police in that scenario? I just don't think they're capable of it. My personal solution would be, you've just got to strengthen the family unit and strengthen them from this age, and hope like hell. You by the time you get to the age that they're doing that shit anyway, they're already broken. I don't
give up on anyone.
I don't give up on them, but as a society, we're not strengthening our young people. We're not empowering them in any way, shape or form. They go through school where they're battered into submission, be good little drones, tick the box, don't think, don't, that assertive child needs Ritalin because he's obviously ADHD. And again, I have this really weird thing in my head where it's like I can see bigger pictures, kind of, it's like a big jigsaw in my head. And I go, if I can fix that kid now, I'm not going to have to worry about them when they're 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 30, because at 8, and, we've had my 8-year-old on one of the programs because he wanted to say hello, and I don't mind. But he's an assertive kid, and he gets in a little bit of trouble at school sometimes, and they ring up. He hit a kid. Okay, what happened first? The other kid pushed him and then threw him over, and then your kid hit him. Okay, well, don't hit my kid. It's pretty straightforward. And I'd like to think that he'll go through life. I've never gone out of my way to physically hit somebody. You hit me first, I'm going to hit you back. And I think every kid should feel that way, Don't be bullied, but don't be a bully. And if we just raise stronger children, you're not going to have anywhere near these sort of the problems
Yeah.
that we, I think,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, for sure. Look, I totally agree. And I totally agree, but let's apply that to politics and law, right? So if we create a dependence on government, and if we see them as a parent that, you know, gives us lollies when we're good and gives us a stick when we're bad, and we see the mechanism and infrastructure out of government as having those roles, then we do lose autonomy and individual freedom and rights. And I think in our society, we've given up way too much of that. But under all of the conversations that we've been having, there's a principle called the rule of law that is imperative. And it's kind of like the foundation that holds all of this up, right? Parliament, the judiciary, the executive, government as a whole does not work if we don't all believe in and practice this principle of the rule of law. What is it? Well, it's this theory that says no one should be above the law, right? Laws should be fair and reasonable and equitable. They should be accessible to all people and understandable, right? You can understand it, you can read it, you can apply it, you can access it, you can read it. And majority of the time, it can not be retrospective. And there are a few other principles within that. But what its main issue, I think, that we're facing today is the first one: no one should be above the law. And what we've been talking about really is an abuse of that power, right? People in power who are abusing their position. And I think, you know, it is a danger for anyone who gets into any form of leadership position. And of course, democracy tries to hold those checks and balances on people a lot more. But again, if our democracy is under threat and those checks and balances are under threat, then more likely than not, it's the elite that are going to have more power and be able to control the common little guy that's just trying to survive, just trying to feed their family, just trying to get by. You know, goal is to take their family for a holiday in the next 5 years, that kind of thing, you know, like it's heartbreaking.
Clearly, where we're heading. Now, as a trained lawyer, what you've just suggested is the rule of law, which I like that. I mean, my rule of law personally, I've got a little slogan I use all the time, and again, I just do it because I do stuff. You know, is do no harm and take no shit. That's my personal little philosophy. The libertarian thing is the no harm principle, and yours is the rule of law. But I mean, I've been into law libraries. They're fucking terrifying. That's not a rule of law. They're wall-to-wall banks. And I don't know one lawyer on the planet. I know quite a few lawyers. I've just met them through the years, you know, being active like I am. And there's not a lawyer on the planet that knows all these laws. Not one.
Impossible. Of course not.
That takes me back to, again, another simpleton, one who had billions of dollars, was Kerry Packer, when he pointed out that why is it that every time you want to bring in a new law, we don't repeal 2 of the old ones? I mean, I actually, if I recall, and you probably be a better person, is it still illegal to be found with 50 kilograms of potatoes in WA? Because I'm pretty sure that's still a law in Western Australia from during the war. Listen, I'm pretty sure that I know at one stage, I don't think that law's ever been repealed, that it's actually illegal to have more than 50 kilos of potatoes. I mean, you're the lawyer. I'll trust you if you can. But I'm going to have a look. But I'm sure I read somewhere that
I'm going to look that up for sure.
Nonsensical laws that's still in existence, not because anybody ever upholds it, but because nobody's ever repealed it. So if you've got some overzealous, you know, dickhead who goes, "How dare you? I'm going to charge you." I actually, from what I understand, it's still a law in Western Australia that it's illegal to have more than 50 kilos of potatoes, which is ridiculous. We know that.
One of the things I used to do is write laws for the Attorney General, and we do repeal laws. And of course, once laws are amended, we need to record what year these amendments took place and give reasons for it. So there are documents that you can access called explanatory memorandums that say, look, this came about because there was a lobbyist, or there was an issue in society, or there was a gap in the law, or something, like a reason for why the law should exist or should be pushed forward. But of course, we know that unfortunately, a lot of the laws that are pushed through Parliament are based on more politicking rather than the benefit of citizens. So, for example, when major parties are pushing an agenda, they will push for certain laws, of course, to be either amended or put forward either as a private member's bill or whatever the case is. With any law in a democracy, the common citizen should have the right to, number one, have access to community consultation, or, visiting their member of parliament, or like a draft online that they can engage with. So, for example, if we want to make a law that says that, I don't know, school should be up to the age of 21 instead of 18, you know what I mean? Because some people just don't go to school and they need more schooling, for example, for parenting classes or something like that. And we pass this law. And if the community doesn't have an opportunity to say something about this, obviously it's going to affect many families' lives, majority of families, right? And that's not the way democracy works. They should have a chance. But of course, the amount of laws that are passed in Parliament is beyond the capacity of what the common person has to respond or engage with it. So we've got a system that's kind of a bit broken because of that. We're pushing through too many laws, and we don't know what the latest law, even lawyers themselves have to look up laws every other week to figure out, have there been amendments to this? How is it working now? I mean, the family court system is a perfect example of that. And immigration law, oh my gosh, that changes almost every day, depending on the policies and who's in power. And it
are you sure we still should base everything on the rule of law? Because it sounds very complicated.
Well, I think we've made it complicated for ourselves. I think we do need to get back to basics. We need to... if we all lived by the rules that Jesus Christ in history summed up for us, he said, there are two major things you need to focus on. Love God, respect him, love others as you love yourself. And he did that because he knows that we go a bit cray-cray with our lawmaking, right? The Jews had 660 however many laws, and they're like, which one is the most important law? And he's like, relax, chill. It's basically love each other, right? When you think about it, do not steal, do not murder, don't commit adultery, all of that stuff, right? If you love someone, you're not really going to do that, right? So my theory is, all you need is love.
She can be a singer as well.
All you need is love, love, love. Love is all you need. It would be a better place.
100%. There's no argument for that, mate. And you see all the stuff that's going on now, and we're in a fear-driven society as opposed to a position. And I see love as strength.
Yeah.
And you sort of, and we're operating from fear all across society. Certainly, Western society we're operating from a place of fear. You're in the position you're in, not just from your work with advocacy and stuff. That's a place from strength. You go, I'm stronger than these people. I'm going to try and help them. That's a doer's attitude, and you're also in a position politically where you're brave enough to stand up for what you believe, and that. And I say to people all the time, I don't agree with a lot of what you said, but and I'm not saying you personally. I think you and I probably agree on an awful lot. But even if I really disagree with somebody, but they're really passionate and committed, I can go, you know what? Even though we disagree, I can respect how committed you are to your philosophy, your faith, your beliefs, your whatever the case may be. The ones that get really upset about are the ones who change their team like they change their undies. And it's like, I hope they change their undies. But you're just like, you guys have no principles, no code of ethics, no consistency in your philosophies, and those are the sort of people that from what I've seen, we get in Parliament all the time. They'd sell Nana up the river if they thought it'd get them an extra 10 votes. And and I've been criticised heavily for the fact that, well, if you just change this and this about your campaign, more people would vote for you. I changed that about my campaign. I might as well join the Liberal Party or the Labor Party, and I've never had any intention to do so.
Yeah, and look, I think you've touched on something that's really important because, at the heart of human behavior is ideology and philosophy, right? If we as a people understand who we are, our core values, our beliefs, our identity, as Australian, as whatever, a community, right? Then we know what we're about. So this is what frustrates me with the two-party preferred system at the moment. They've totally lost their identity. They've totally compromised on who they once were. So it's unclear what they stand for. So how do they expect constituents to vote for them if they're flipping and flopping on certain matters, or they're being kind of cagey because they want to get more votes? I think at the end of the day, that kind of compromise leads to, how can you trust someone who tomorrow will change their mind on policy or whatever? And I think that people are starting to wake up that the two-party preferred system is not working in our democracy, because it's too controlled, and they have compromised on their
20 hours.
They have compromised on their values and identity so much so that they've lost it, and so where do we stand? What's the future of politics look like in Australia? I don't think we can continue the way we have, because we've had a global disruption economically, socially, and politically. We've seen that with Brexit. We've seen that with Trump, and people are sick of it. Like, they are the silent majority, they are inside frustrated, but they don't feel like there's strong leadership or strong alternatives, or they don't know what to do. And so they give in to the fear, they give in to the floundering, and it frustrates me because I'm sick of the silent majority being silent. I'm sick of disengaged people because, the system's broken and it doesn't work. Well, bloody get in there and do something about it, And so we need to really take a step back and go, hold on, let's get back to the basics, which is, who are we? Who do we want to be as a people group, right? What is our core value? What is our identity? What do we want to work towards as a community, right? What are our major priorities? It's like a family, How do you spend your weekend? You've only got a certain amount of time and resources. How are you going to spend it? That's a kind of decision making we need to make as a people group, because at the end of the day, we are just a global family. And if one part of us is hurting, the whole party is going to hurt. That's just the reality of it.
Yep. Mate, I love your passion. I love your enthusiasm. It makes me a little bit happy. I've come across a few people in my travels that make me a little bit happy that they've just got the courage to come forward. And I keep saying to people, I'm in the political space. I've run as a candidate a few times. I've never actively put my hand up and said I want to be a candidate. I'm often asked because I think people know I've got a thick enough skin to do it. But I like I say and I get a lot of heat from the Liberal Party at the moment anyway, and the argument I put forward is, if you guys did your job, I wouldn't exist politically. I don't have any inclination to run campaigns. I don't have any inclination to be elected. I'm the guy, if I get elected, people go, well, what will you do? I'll go, I'll just tell you, do what you like to do. And, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I can't tell you how to live a better life than you can live, I don't think anybody in Parliament can. All you can do if you're involved in Parliament really is to try and provide the things that people can't provide for themselves. It's the only real justification for government in my eyes is if there's something that you can't do for yourself, then the government, great. Other than that, bugger off and stay out of the way. And people go, you can't run a campaign on that. And I go, well, that's what I've got. I'm not available for sale. They can't buy me. So, I think it's fantastic when somebody like yourself comes out and again, and I've got a lot of respect for quite a few people. And I met Mark Latham and I've had a bit to do with Ross Cameron, as I said at the start of the show, who's coming on as well, and David Lionhelm, and there's some really good people. I don't agree with them on everything, but they've got to stand up and have a go. I don't care if I get no votes. I couldn't give a monkey's really. But if I'm in there, I can have that debate and that conversation with people. And if I can make one person go, well, hang on, that's one rule too many, one law too many. Or, no, maybe we don't really need to tell Andrea whether she's allowed to sing in public or not, or whether she's got to wear a mask in public or not. Or, you know what I mean? Like, these things aren't for government. Government has no business on what people wear or don't wear. A government's role, particularly, and I will touch on it in a second, in my eyes, as far as COVID goes, is to give out the best, most honest information that they can, and then let the people decide.
Nice change.
Sorry?
That would be a nice change.
Well, that's all I ask. That's all I ask. Just put it.
So we can make an informed decision, right?
Correct. And people go to me, well, you're risking my life if you're not wearing a mask. Well, if you're that scared of wearing, people not wearing masks, keep socially distanced or stay at home. Or if your mask is going to do the job that it's supposed to do, wear the mask. Or, I went and bought a Jason Voorhees mask that I wear sometimes just to take the piss out of the whole thing. I should have got a Guy Fawkes mask, but, I thought I'd do something different. But, and if you want to get the jab, hey, go for it. I'm not here to say you can or you should or you shouldn't. If you do the homework on the vaccination and you look at it and you go, I'm concerned about getting COVID, I'd like to have the injection, I'm all for it. But the minute some police officer shows up on, be it Gladys or Dan or Mark or any of these lunatics saying, we've got this injection and you need to take it, I'm going to have a really serious issue with it. And I'm not going to be letting anybody jam me with anything I don't want jammed. And if it happens to escalate, well, it'll escalate. I know you did a post yesterday or the day before with a mask, and I shared it. And I got that thrown back at me today. So that's quite funny. Mate, what are your thoughts on it?
Freedom of choice. We need to educate ourselves as citizens. We need to decide for ourselves and our families how to move forward. But of course, we do need to take responsibility as well. But at the moment, I feel like we're not being given the whole picture. We're not being given all the information we should be afforded to make an informed decision. So I'm talking about scientific information, medical information, and of course, we need to think about how our actions affect our neighbor, our friend, our co-workers, and we need to take responsibility for those actions, definitely. But we should also not be forced by government, because this is about democracy, right? Once they start to force us to do certain things, this is dictatorship, and we allow it. Because of this fear, what I've been watching is I'm so afraid to die from COVID. I'm going to give up all my freedoms and rights. Do what you want, government, because you're my savior. You're going to save me from COVID. You know what? That's a lie. The government cannot save us from COVID. As a community, yes, we need to take restrictions and be sensible and help each other through this period, right? But the billions of dollars that it's cost the government in these restrictions, and to what end? How many strands are there going to be? How many, 3, 4, whatever phases are going to come out of this? We need to move forward. No government, whether it's federal or state, have I seen to come out and say, post-COVID, this is our approach. This is our solution. This is our strategy. No one is thinking about post-COVID. They're just talking about in COVID. What, do they think this is going to last forever? And I can't accept that. I can't accept that this is a new normal. In history, swine flu, all the rest of it, we've overcome Ebola. We've overcome much worse diseases in one sense, right? And we don't have all the stats before us on exactly what has happened in COVID. A lot has been kept from us, from where it began and how, to how it's spreading, to what other government solutions are. I know that internationally, different countries have had different approaches, but it's just not discussed in mainstream media. There's medical advice out there saying that wearing a mask is actually detrimental to your health. We need to listen to the experts on this. And there's medical professionals that have come out and said, the testing for COVID is incorrect. The vaccinations for COVID, mask the symptoms. You're still contagious and it doesn't get rid of it. And it actually messes with your DNA. So if that's the case, why are we advocating for it? I understand that the people that have been tested with this vaccine have had adverse effects, even death, ended up in death. So I can't see it a positive thing to roll out a vaccine that we're uncertain about, that has adverse effects on people's health, and that doesn't actually solve the problem we're looking to solve. I mean, this is just common sense, people, right?
Well, the question becomes is what problem are they trying to solve? Are they trying to solve the COVID problem, or are they trying to solve this free-thinking, rebellious-natured Liberal Party, ex-Liberal Party candidates and libertarians and the like who happen to just, not be concerned about these things? I'm as concerned about being eaten by a shark at the moment as I am of catching COVID. Now, in saying that, I'm in a square room that's made of cement, not likely to have a shark in here, nor COVID, I suspect. But in saying that, I can also respect other people's fears. I'm not trying to scare you, and I'm sure you're not either. Do your own homework. Don't just watch Toshi in the morning having some sort of a tanty, because, that guy would have conniption about just about anything. The point would be, okay, whichever favourite talking head you have in the morning that you watch, and I've got this bad habit of a couple of mornings a week, I'll wake up and watch like an hour of breakfast TV just to see what nonsense I'm going to get for the day. But go and do some research, look at multiple concepts, ideas, and then work out what suits you. If you want to get a jab, go get one. You want to wear a mask? Wear two. Whatever. That Fauci guy in America, he's changed his mind a dozen times because he doesn't really know. The only thing that I see as different is I don't really know, and I just go, I don't really know, but I feel I'm pretty comfortable with this, this, and this, and I'm willing to take that risk. With others, they kind of go, well, we think Fauci knows stuff, so we'll just take that on board. And, if he tells us to put a hula hoop on and dance on one leg, we'll do that because it will save us from COVID. And I'd like to think Australians were stronger and more independent and, freer, but sometimes I really worry that we're still sort of glorified convicts who can't get out of our own way. It's a bit disappointing and a bit disheartening for me.
Absolutely. And to sum it all up, I would say choose freedom over fear, right? Choose faith in the common, human person, right? Choose faith in each other and choose freedom over fear. That's what I would say.
I'd say that's the perfect wind-up for this, ladies and gentlemen. Resolute TV episode 1 for series 3. The amazing Andrea Tokaji, independent for Balvidus. She's now got a new website up, which I'll get there to put links in the description at www.andreatokaji.com. Is there a .au at the back? No, perfect. Check her out. Check her out on Instagram, Facebook, all that sort of stuff. Thank you for your time. It's been lovely chatting with you. Congratulations on the disendorsement, because I reckon that's probably one of the most empowering things you can do in 2020 is be disowned by an entity with no scruples. So, mate, thank you so much. Have a great evening, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Let's do it again soon, hey?
As often as you like. Free platform.
See you.
That's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Resolute TV, and we have more to come.